Sophia Minor, a 1990s celebrity, was once everywhere: movies, music, and magazines. One evening, while her bodyguard, Bell, helped her with a puzzle, he heard a noise at the door. Checking it, he found Paul Durson, a man in a suit holding a rose, there to propose to Sophia. Bell reminded Paul of his previous warning, come back again and the police would be called. Unbothered, Paul insisted they had something important to discuss, but Bell shut him down, stating he and Sophia were never in a relationship. Paul mocked Bell, suggesting Sophia only spent time with him out of pity since he had lost his wife. Suspicious of how Paul knew about their puzzle nights, Bell ordered him to leave. Later, the doorbell rang again. Bell opened it to find Paul pressing a knife to his own throat. Keeping calm, Bell reminded Paul he had no real connection to Sophia. Instead of backing down, Paul made a bizarre request. He asked Bell to pretend to be Sophia. Reluctantly, Bell played along, allowing Paul to kneel and propose with an imaginary ring. Paul then kissed Bell's hand and declared they would be married. When he mentioned a ceremonial wedding dagger, Bell tried to de-escalate by professing love, hoping to get the weapon. But Paul suddenly lunged, stabbing him. As Bell lay wounded, Paul stepped into Sophia's house, removed his shoes, and wandered inside as if he belonged. Bell, barely conscious, tried to react but passed out. 6 months later, Sophia welcomed basketball player Devon Rhodes to her home. As they chatted, Sophia's assistant, Kayla, announced Bell had arrived. Sophia hurriedly got dressed and introduced him to Rhodes, showing off a puzzle she had been working on. Rhodes noticed a missing piece, but Sophia admitted she couldn't find it. Meanwhile, Bell returned home to his daughter, Abby. She hated that he worked as a bodyguard, believing it put his life below his employer's. She also mentioned receiving another strange phone call. Bell, suspecting who it was, firmly told her to hang up next time. Elsewhere, Paul's friend Jage retrieved a package from the post office, following Paul's instructions. That evening, Sophia and Rhodes went to a nightclub while Bell watched a news report. Two dangerous psychiatric patients, Paul Durson and Penelope Pascal, had escaped and already killed 2 people. Bell immediately took Abby to her Aunt Eleanor's house for safety. Meanwhile, Paul met with Jay, thrilled that their plan was moving forward. Soon after, Penelope climbed into Jay's truck and Paul introduced her as his assistant, explaining she helped him and his girlfriend manage their busy schedules. Later that night, Sophia arrived home with Rhodes and found Bell waiting with Officer Parker. Bell informed her that Paul had escaped just 2 hours earlier. Meanwhile, Paul and GH arrived at Pastor Lutzner's house, where Penelope, pretending to need help, knocked on the door. At Sophia's house, Bell lent Rhodes some spare clothes and warned him. Paul had once left him with a ruptured spleen before turning himself in. Meanwhile, Eleanor spotted a suspicious figure, JH, lurking outside. Alarmed, she called Bell, who instructed her to contact the police. Grabbing his gun, he left, ordering Rhodes to lock the door behind him. As Sophia's other bodyguard, Juan, monitored the security cameras, Rhodes wandered into her office and found a letter. Reading it, he realized Sophia had approached multiple men, including him, for an upcoming project. Feeling used, he confronted her. She told him he was free to leave, but Rhodes, disappointed, noted that Bell had already gone. At Eleanor's house, Officer Carter arrived but dismissed her concerns about Jayesh. Frustrated, she insisted something was wrong, but Carter downplayed it, only agreeing to stay if offered coffee. Annoyed, Eleanor sent him outside to stand guard. Back at Sophia's, she and Rhodes sat down to work on a puzzle. Rhodes compared himself to a discarded puzzle piece, used and then abandoned. Meanwhile, one noticed a mysterious trunk on security footage before the power suddenly cut out. Irritated, Sophia complained the issue should have been fixed weeks ago. When Rhodes offered to check the circuit breaker, his comment about her wealth led to an argument. As one searched for a way to restore power, Penelope ambushed him, electrocuting him with a taser until he vomited. To spite the attack, he fought back, stabbing her with a fork. However, Penelope overpowered him, slamming a microwave onto his head repeatedly. Inside, Sophia tried to barricade herself but ended up injuring herself in the process. Though she secured most of the doors, she suddenly noticed something unsettling. Her previously incomplete puzzle was now finished. Confused and unnerved, she remained unaware of the figure standing right behind her. Meanwhile, Rhodes struggled to open the gate due to the power outage and decided to locate the circuit breaker. As he restored electricity, Paul emerged from the shadows and wrapped Sophia in a tight embrace. Frozen in fear, she listened as he whispered how much he had missed her. Only when she snapped back to reality did she break free, grabbing the nearest object and striking him. She hurled anything she could, fruits, a toaster, desperately trying to create distance. The noise alerted Rhodes, who sprinted to help, but before Sophia could unlock the door, Paul slammed her head against it. At Eleanor's house, Abby revealed that according to MTV News, Paul's former girlfriend had collapsed and died at one of Sophia's concerts. Belle, now arriving at the house, assured them that there was no one outside. However, unbeknownst to them, Officer Carter had already been killed, strangled with a bicycle chain by JH, who had just parked outside. JH then forced Belle to drive him to Sophia's house, while Paul inside prepared for his twisted wedding. Dressed in a suit, he inspected his ceremonial dagger. As the pieces of his disturbing plan fell into place, Sophia realized she would have to play along to survive. As Penelope leaves, Sophia manages to pry open the vocal booth door, thanks to the bandage she had discreetly placed on the latch bolt earlier. She then grabs an electric guitar and positions herself behind the door, ready to strike. However, when someone steps inside, she swings only to realize too late that it's Rhodes. Meanwhile, in another room, Paul explains to Abby that the reason he kept calling her was because he wanted her to be the flower girl at his wedding. When she hears a noise coming from the large trunk nearby, he casually opens it to reveal the wounded pastor he had attacked outside his house earlier. Back in the house, Rhodes regains consciousness and apologizes to Sophia for leaving her, acknowledging how utterly insane their current situation has become. Before they can process their next move, Penelope bursts in and swings a bat at Sophia, but Rhodes intervenes and takes the hit instead. Sophia retaliates by kicking Penelope into a piano, prompting the escaped patient to humorously tap the keys. Seizing the moment, the pop star sings along with her attacker in an awkward exchange, until Penelope suddenly smacks her across the face with a tambourine, scolding her for being out of tune. The deranged woman then grabs Sophia and hurls herself through the glass door, sending both of them tumbling down the stairs. As Sophia scrambles away, Penelope follows closely behind, pinning her down and dousing her in lighter fluid, preparing to set her ablaze. Thinking fast, Sophia grabs a meat thermometer and stabs her, then turns the tables by covering Penelope in lighter fluid as well, but instead of lighting her up, she rushes back inside to help Rhodes. Sophia wastes no time calling 911, but before she can complete the call, Penelope attacks again. She slams the singer against the wall, gaining the upper hand. Desperate, Sophia pushes the thermometer even deeper into her attacker's wound before shoving her into the vocal booth. She then lights a piece of paper on fire and tosses it inside, trapping Penelope in an inferno. Horrified, she later extinguishes the flames through the small booth window. When Rhodes regains consciousness, he mutters that he saw a little girl inside the house earlier. Alarmed, Sophia changes her clothes and rushes out to find Abby. Meanwhile, Paul stumbles upon Rhodes and mistakes him for his bride. He talks to him affectionately before spotting Penelope's burnt remains, though instead of reacting, he simply ignores her and shows Rhodes the ceremonial dagger, explaining that it will protect them from those who wish to ruin their happiness. Elsewhere, Sophia finally finds Abby and the others, surprising JH. She demands to know where Belle is, unaware that the bodyguard only suffered a graze when he was shot. Because of his missing eye, JH hadn't checked properly to confirm whether Belle was truly dead before leaving him behind. Meanwhile, Sophia's assistant Kayla locates Belle and lends him her car. Without hesitation, he speeds towards Sophia's house, where he finds a wedding invitation waiting for him, confirming the stalker's intentions. Wasting no time, he rushes toward the cassowary tabernacle while calling for backup. At the church, Paul waits eagerly at the altar as Sophia sits in forced silence. He instructs Abby to walk down the aisle, tossing imaginary flower petals. Shortly after, Rhodes arrives escorted by Belle, who, despite the absurdity of the moment, doesn't question why the athlete is now wearing a wedding dress. Instead, he calmly leads him down the aisle, whispering a warning not to provoke Paul, as he's prone to violent outbursts. Once they reach the altar, Paul thanks Belle for bringing his bride and vows to cherish her forever. Taking advantage of the moment, Belle discreetly passes a knife to Sophia. The ceremony begins, but just as Paul is about to say his vows, JH interrupts, pointing out the obvious, that the person standing before him is actually a man. Trying to salvage the moment, Rhodes affectionately calls Paul baby and insists they should ignore JH. But before things can continue, Sophia steps forward, taking responsibility for the mess they're in and insisting that she should be the one standing at the altar. Paul, however, is having none of it. He commands her to sit down. Despite this, the ceremony proceeds. With a smile, Pastor Lutzner pronounces the couple husband and wife. Overjoyed, Paul kisses Rhodes, believing he is finally with the woman of his dreams. But the fantasy comes to a brutal end when, without warning, he drives the ceremonial dagger into Rhodes' stomach, causing him to collapse. Reacting swiftly, Belle lands a solid punch on Paul before taking JH down as well. Sophia quickly severs the rope binding her wrists and seizes the dagger. She tells Paul it's over before kicking him in the face. Belle takes the weapon from her, ensuring she's unharmed, only for JH to snatch Abby, threatening to shoot her if Belle doesn't surrender. Left with no choice, Belle complies, dropping the knife and sliding it toward the criminal. But before JH can pull the trigger, Rhodes, barely alive, musters enough strength to grab the ceremonial dagger and plunge it into JH, ending him. With the nightmare finally over, Paul stumbles out of the cassowary tabernacle, still under the delusion that he's just been married. Smiling, he waves to the guests and steps into what he believes is a limousine, when in reality, it's a police car. As EMTs tend to the wounded and officers secure the scene, Bell prepares to leave with Abby, finally admitting that being a bodyguard is too dangerous and that he won't be returning to his old job. Meanwhile, Paul, lost in his delusions, enjoys his ride to the police station, imagining himself on his way to a romantic honeymoon in Maui.